Loving God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, for you are our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. It's not very often that a news story causes me to tear up, but there was a news story this week that some of you may have seen. Folks, some firemen from Newtown, Connecticut, loaded a truck full of clothing and other essentials and drove it to Moore, Oklahoma, where they met and shared with the people of Moore. And even the newscaster, as he was narrating this moment when families from Moore welcomed and greeted folks from Newtown, was choked up. It was an act of extraordinary compassion. And obviously, some of the folk in Moore, having lost children in the school that collapsed, could absolutely relate to the pain, the sense of loss of folk in Newtown. There was something wonderful, enormously gratifying, and very instructive about what it means to give, to share, to be aware of another's loss, another's situation, and to bring not only empathy, but an experience with which they can identify your own pain into their pain, and the sharing of that moment is powerful. The reading from 1 Kings today is a remarkable reading about what it means to be aware of the mission of God. A lot of dynamics are unfolding here. There is a famine. Elijah is becoming increasingly unpopular with the political authorities because he is blaming them for the lack of sharing across the region, the sharing that should be done with all people. He is blaming them for hoarding the food that is available. So Elijah is trying to escape into another setting where he might be safe. God calls him to Zarephath, this ancient Phoenician town, and God says, "You will meet a widow there." And as it turns out, that stranger, who might have well known of Elijah, but probably wasn't in his circle of friends, becomes someone very important to the unfolding lesson that is taught by this experience. You've all heard of first fruits giving. Giving from the first of what we have, the abundance of what we have, not out of what's left over. Giving, writing that check or an act of charity that is the first thing we do after we are paid, rather than the last thing we do when we have taken care of ourselves. Well, in this interesting story, Elijah, representing the presence of God's teaching and ministry, asks the widow not only for water, but for a small cake. Will you make me a cake And then, by all means, make yourself and your son a cake. And she immediately says, yes, I will. And in that very action, we have the unfolding of a behavior that cares for the other before the self. Elijah's well-being is responded to. God's work is responded to symbolically prior to the feeding of self. And then the interesting blessing that results. Elijah says, the meal, the oil will not fail. You will have what you need until the rains come and the crops grow. That, my friends, is an article of faith. And so it unfolds. I think there are many times in the living of our lives in this cynical culture in which we find ourselves, where the focus is so profoundly upon meeting our own needs, and then the afterthought is for someone less fortunate. Here, the message is abundantly clear. If you as, or if we as people of God can feel called to the work of God first, and to our own needs second, there is an abundant blessing that results. And we are asked to believe that, to embrace that, to know that. In the gospel, Jesus is visiting the town of Nain, N-A-I-N, an ancient community. And as he enters the town, he sees a funeral procession. And those in the town who know him tell him what's happening, what's unfolding. A widow has lost her son. It would be a terrible tragedy for this family, this widow. Obviously no husband, no other son. The only result of this is that, given the customs of the time, that this woman will survive only upon the charity or the handout or the kindness of friends and neighbors. She may not even have a place to live. And Jesus looks with compassion upon this whole setting and the unfolding of this event, and chooses to demonstrate God's concern for it by saying, "Young man, rise." And this family's life is altered. Now, I must say that when I read a passage like this, it challenges me, because I am well aware of the reality that not every situation that needs healing or that needs the gift of change receives